Roughly 60% of the honey consumed in the United States is imported, and FDA has made it clear that any honey mixed with added sweeteners is adulterated under federal law. Yet right now, 7 store-brand honey jars sitting on ordinary grocery shelves carry purity risk signals that most shoppers never check. The label says, honey. The bare bottle looks friendly. The color looks golden. But the ingredient behind the squeeze cap may not be what the front label is selling. And the 3 that pass, stick through to number 1, earn that position because of something most shoppers never think to look for on a honey jar. The pattern is not that honey disappears from the shelf. The pattern is that the honest jar becomes harder to find while the questionable one stays cheap, stays stocked, and stays trusted by default. These 10 entries span store brands, budget blends, imported origin labels, and a few names that still do what the label promises. Number 10. Store brand Clover honey in the Squeeze Bear. Vague origin signal. The most common honey format in America is the plastic Squeeze Bear on the store brand shelf, and the first purity risk signal lives on the back label where most shoppers never look. Flip the bear around and check the origin statement. Many store brand Clover honeys carry a line that reads, a blend of honeys from the USA and other countries, or just product of multiple countries, without naming the exact source nations. That vague origin language is not illegal, but it is the single fastest tell that the jar's supply chain cannot be traced to one reliable producer. FDA does not require brands to name every origin country on a blended honey label. That means a jar blending domestic honey with imported honey from countries flagged for adulteration concern can sit on the same shelf as a single-source jar and carry the same friendly bear bottle. The shopper sees Clover honey. The back label sees a supply chain that could include anything. The purity is not guaranteed to be compromised, but the traceability is gone, and traceability is the only way a shopper can verify what actually went into the bottle. The shelf signal is easy. Turn the bear around. If the origin line is vague, the jar is not necessarily bad, but the shopper has lost the one tool that matters, knowing where the honey came from. Add that to the fact that roughly 60% of U.S. honey consumption depends on imports, and the vague bear becomes a quiet risk most kitchens never question. Number 9. Budget blend honey. Rice syrup adulteration risk. Below the name brand shelf, many grocery stores carry a budget honey that costs noticeably less per ounce than everything around it. That price gap is the second purity risk signal. Honey is expensive to produce. Bees are expensive to maintain. Extraction, filtering, and bottling cost real money. When a jar costs dramatically less than its shelf neighbors, the math has to come from somewhere. And in the global honey market, the most common cost shortcut is dilution with cheaper syrups. Rice syrup is the adulteration method that concerns food scientists most, because standard C4 sugar testing, the old industry test designed to catch corn syrup, does not reliably detect rice syrup. Rice syrup is a C3 sugar, like honey itself, which means it can hide inside a jar without triggering the basic purity test that many importers still rely on. Newer NMR testing catches it, but NMR testing is expensive and not universally applied to every imported shipment. The household consequence is invisible. The jar pours the same. The color looks the same. The toast tastes sweet. But the nutritional profile, the enzymatic activity, and the antimicrobial properties that real honey carries are diluted or gone. The shopper paid for honey. The kitchen got sweetener. Watch the price signal. If the jar is dramatically cheaper than single-source domestic honey on the same shelf, ask why. The answer may be rice syrup. Number 8. Store-brand wildflower honey. Ultra-filtered, pollen removed. Wildflower honey should carry pollen. Pollen is the fingerprint that proves where the honey came from, what flowers fed the bees, and whether the jar matches its label. When pollen is removed through ultrafiltration, the honey loses its traceability. A well-known food safety news investigation tested store-bought honey and found that a large majority of supermarket samples had pollen removed entirely, making it impossible to verify origin, floral source, or whether the jar had been adulterated along the way. Ultrafiltration is not the same as normal straining. Normal straining removes wax and bee parts. Ultrafiltration forces honey through extremely fine filters under pressure, stripping out pollen grains that are naturally present. The result is a perfectly clear, perfectly smooth honey that looks premium but has lost its only biological proof of identity. Ironically, USDA grading standards reward clarity, which means a heavily filtered jar can score higher on appearance while carrying less proof of what it actually is. The risk signal for shoppers is a wildflower label combined with a perfectly clear, light-colored pour. Real wildflower honey from diverse floral sources often carries slight cloudiness, color variation, and crystallization tendencies. When the jar looks too clean and too uniform, the filtration may have gone beyond straining and into identity removal. That does not prove adulteration, but it removes the evidence that would disprove it. Number 7. Imported clover honey. Transshipment concern. The United States has maintained anti-dumping duties on Chinese honey for years due to documented adulteration and market flooding concerns. That trade barrier created a well-documented secondary problem: transshipment. Honey originating in China has been documented moving through third countries, repackaged, relabeled, and re-exported to the US under a different country of origin. The countries most frequently cited in federal enforcement cases include India and Vietnam, though the pattern is not limited to those two. When a store-brand jar says "product of India" or "product of Vietnam," that does not mean the honey is fraudulent. Both countries produce legitimate honey, but the transshipment pattern means that a country of origin label alone is not proof of actual origin, especially when the price per ounce is unusually low and the jar is sold through a discount channel with limited supply chain auditing. The household does not see this. The household sees a jar that says honey, names a country, and costs less. The label meets legal requirements. The jar passes visual inspection, but the supply chain behind it may include one or more undisclosed steps that the label does not reflect. The shelf signal is a combination: imported origin from a country associated with transshipment concern, plus a price point below domestic equivalents, plus no third-party purity certification visible on the label. Any one factor alone is not damning. All three together form the pattern worth watching. Number 6. Store-brand honey packets and sticks. Blend-grade risk. Single-serve honey packets and honey sticks are the format most likely to carry the lowest grade honey available to the packer. The logic is simple. When honey is portioned into tiny, single-use packets, the shopper never compares it seriously to a full jar. The expectation is lower, the price per unit is small, and the label surface is physically too small to carry detailed origin or purity information in a readable way. Many food service honey packets are filled with the cheapest available blend-grade honey, which may be a blend of multiple origins, filtered aggressively, and sourced from the lowest-cost import channel the packer can find. The FDA labeling rules still apply, but the format discourages close reading. The shopper tears and squeezes. The tea gets sweet. Nobody audits the packet. For households that buy honey sticks or packets in bulk for kids, lunches, or tea, the purity risk is real, but invisible. The format is a trust shortcut. The shopper trusts the brand printed on the box, not the supply chain printed in microscopic text on the back of a foil wrapper. And because packets are often bought for convenience instead of flavor, nobody notices if the taste is flat, the aroma is weak, or the texture feels more like generic syrup than floral honey. The calm move is not to throw every packet away. It is to stop treating packet honey as pantry honey. Use it for travel, lunches, or short-term convenience if you already have it. But if purity is the reason you are buying honey, switch from packets to a jar with a verifiable origin statement. One jar replaces 100 packets, and the label is readable. Number 5. Light-colored store-brand honey. Color as purity misdirection. Light-colored honey is not automatically purer than dark honey, but store shelves are designed to suggest exactly that. The lightest jars sit at eye level. The label says "pure" in clean white text. The cap is golden. The visual signal screams quality, and many shoppers unconsciously assume that lighter means less processed, less adulterated, more delicate. The reality is more complicated. Honey color depends on floral source, not purity. Clover and acacia tend to be light. Buckwheat and wildflower tend to be dark. A light color says nothing about whether the jar has been diluted, ultra-filtered, or blended with cheaper syrups. In fact, some adulteration methods, particularly rice syrup dilution, produce a lighter, clearer result that mimics the appearance of premium honey while reducing actual honey content. The shelf signal that matters is not color. It is the combination of color, price, and origin transparency. A light jar with a named single-source origin and third-party certification is a different product than a light jar with a vague origin line and a price too low to be explained by bees alone. If the label gives you only a pretty front panel and no traceable backstory, the color is decoration, not evidence. This matters for preppers because honey is usually bought for more than sweetness. It is bought because it stores well, because it can sit on a shelf for years, because it sweetens oats and tea without refrigeration, and because people believe it is a natural food. If the jar is mostly a visual promise, the pantry is trusting marketing instead of proof. Do not let color do the thinking. Read the label. The prettiest jar on the shelf is not automatically the safest. Number 4. Store brand organic honey. Organic does not mean pure. This is where many careful shoppers get tripped up. The organic label on a honey jar means the bees were managed according to organic farming practices. It addresses pesticide exposure, hive treatment, and forage area. What organic certification does not test for is adulteration with added syrups, ultrafiltration, or blending with non-organic honey after harvest. Organic is a farming standard, not a purity standard. A jar can be certified organic and still carry adulteration risk if the supply chain between the hive and the shelf includes blending facilities in countries with documented purity concerns. The USDA organic seal proves the farming method. It does not prove the jar was not diluted downstream. Most shoppers assume organic means the jar passed every possible quality test. It means the jar passed one specific category of test, and not the one that catches syrup dilution. The practical consequence is a shopper paying a premium for organic honey, believing the higher price guarantees purity, while the actual adulteration risk remains unaddressed. The premium bought pesticide-free management. It did not buy proof of undiluted honey. Watch for organic jars that combine the organic seal with a vague origin statement and no additional third-party purity certification. The organic label alone is not enough to guarantee the jar is what it claims. Number 3. Raw, unfiltered local honey, passing the purity test. Local honey from a named apiary, sold raw and unfiltered, is one of the most reliable purity signals available to a grocery shopper. The logic is simple. When a jar names the beekeeper, names the region, and visibly contains pollen, wax particles, and natural cloudiness, the supply chain is short enough to be verifiable. There is no transshipment concern. There is no blending facility. There is no ultrafiltration step. The jar went from hive to bottle to shelf with minimal processing. Raw and unfiltered also means the honey retains its natural enzymatic activity, its pollen profile, and its full flavor complexity, which are the properties shoppers are actually paying for when they buy honey instead of corn syrup. The crystallization that many shoppers mistake for spoilage is actually a sign of minimally processed, high-quality honey. Real honey crystallizes. Adulterated honey often does not, because the added syrups resist crystallization. The practical signal is a jar that names a location, shows slight cloudiness or visible particulate, may crystallize over time, and costs more than the budget blends on the same shelf. The price is higher because real beekeeping costs real money. That price difference is not a markup. It is the cost of honesty. If the beekeeper's name, county, phone number, or farm website is on the jar, you have something a generic squeeze bear rarely gives you: accountability. Look for local apiaries at farmers' markets, co-ops, roadside stands, farm stores, or the local products section of the grocery store. The jar does not need to be fancy. It needs to be traceable. Number 2. True Source Certified Honey, passing the purity test. True Source Certified is a USDA-recognized process verification program specifically designed to address honey traceability and combat adulteration. When a jar carries the True Source Certified seal, it means the supply chain has been independently audited by a third party, from origin country through every blending, packing, and shipping step until it reaches the shelf. This is not a farming certification. This is a chain of custody audit. Brands carrying True Source Certified include names like Nature Nates and Dutch Gold, among others. The certification does not guarantee that every molecule in the jar is perfect honey. No certification can, but it does verify that the honey came from where the label says it came from, moved through documented channels, and was not diverted through undisclosed transshipment routes. That addresses the core vulnerability in the global honey supply chain, the gap between what the label says and what actually happened between the hive and the jar. For a household that buys honey regularly, the True Source seal is the single fastest shelf-level check that addresses origin fraud and supply chain manipulation. It costs slightly more per jar. The additional cost pays for the audit trail most budget jars do not carry. Read the label. Look for the seal. The jar that passed a third-party chain of custody audit is a different product than the jar that passed no audit at all. Number 1. Single-source U.S. honey with named beekeeper, passing the purity test. The safest honey on any shelf is the jar that names a real beekeeper and a real location, carries a U.S. origin, and does not blend with imports. This earns the number 1 position not because it is expensive or dramatic, but because it eliminates every single vulnerability on this list in one purchase. No vague origin, no transshipment risk, no ultrafiltration mystery, no blend-grade shortcut, no organic misdirection. The supply chain is one person, one region, one jar. This is the honey most shoppers walk past because it does not sit in the honey aisle at eye level. It often sits on a local product's end cap, at a farmer's market, in a co-op, or on a specialty shelf where the jar looks handmade and the label looks homemade. The bare bottle trained shoppers to trust industrial packaging. The single-source jar asks shoppers to trust a name and a place instead. The jar often crystallizes. It often looks cloudy. It may taste stronger or more complex than the mild, uniform squeeze-bear honey the household is used to. Those differences are features, not flaws. Crystallization means minimal processing. Cloudiness means pollen is present. Stronger flavor means real floral diversity. The jar is doing what honey is supposed to do, reflecting the actual environment the bees foraged in, without industrial correction. If a household wants one confident honey purchase and does not want to research certifications, the single-source domestic jar with a named beekeeper is the answer. The price may be higher per ounce. The jar may be smaller. The label may look modest. But the honey inside passed the purity test before it was ever bottled, because the supply chain was never long enough to be corrupted. Here is the full picture. Roughly 60% of the honey consumed in the United States comes from imports, and FDA has been clear that honey mixed with undeclared sweeteners is adulterated under federal law. Yet the grocery shelf treats every jar the same. Same aisle, same eye level, same golden color, same friendly label. The 7 risk signals on this list are not accusations against specific brands. They are patterns worth checking before the next jar goes into the cart. This week, flip the honey jar already in the pantry and read the origin line. If it says a blend of multiple countries without naming them, that is the first signal. Check the price per ounce against a known single-source domestic jar. If the gap is dramatic, ask what the savings came from. Look for the True Source certified seal or a named beekeeper and location on the label. This month, replace any budget honey packets or squeeze bears that carry vague origin statements with a single jar from a named source, local apiary, True Source certified brand, or a single origin domestic packer. One good jar outlasts a drawer full of packets and carries dramatically more confidence per ounce. Before the next grocery trip, remember that the prettiest jar is not the purest jar. The organic seal is not a purity test. The lightest color is not proof of quality, and the cheapest price always comes from somewhere. A shelf full of honey can look perfectly stocked while the jar worth buying sits in a corner. Nobody checks. The smartest pantry move with honey is not buying the most expensive jar. It is buying the most traceable jar, the one where the label tells a verifiable story instead of a vague promise. The Bear bottle trained an entire generation to trust the shape of the container. The back label is where the truth lives. Which honey brand have you stopped trusting after reading the label more carefully?